It was another ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Los Angeles, or so I thought. The store was bustling with the usual crowd, women, young and old, sorting through the racks of designer skincare products I had carefully curated. I was in my element, greeting familiar faces with a smile, offering a quiet word of advice here and there, making sure everything was in its place. But then, just as I handed a delicate bottle of face serum to a customer, my phone buzzed on the counter. I saw his name. Ryan. I froze for a second, then casually glanced at the screen. I'm leaving you. I'm moving to New York with Emily. I've already emptied the joint account. Ha ha. Good luck. The words burned into my brain. My fingers tightened around the phone, but I didn't let myself react, not in front of the customers, not in front of anyone. I blinked slowly, trying to process what I had just read. My heart didn't race. There were no tears, no frantic thoughts rushing through my mind. There was only a quiet, searing sense of finality. I tucked the phone into my pocket and turned to Mrs. Peterson, still standing there, oblivious to the storm that had just hit me. Can I help you with anything else today? I asked with the same calm professionalism I'd used for years. She didn't notice the tightness in my voice. As she made her way out of the store, my hand reached for my phone again, but not to reply to his text. I didn't need to say anything to him, not yet. My thumb hovered over the screen, sending a quick text to my lawyer. It's time. He just made his move. My lawyer's response came almost instantly. Understood. Papers are ready. We'll file tomorrow. The last few months had been a blur of late nights and whispered conversations. The signs had been there all along, the late work hours that never aligned with his paycheck, the sudden obsession with the gym, the way he started dressing like a man half his age. But it was the little things, the quiet moments, the hidden receipts, that told me everything I needed to know. I locked up the boutique for the night and walked to my car, the weight of the message still fresh in my mind. Ryan thought he was leaving me in pieces, thinking I would crumble under the betrayal. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, the kind I'd been saving for a special occasion, and smiled. Tomorrow, I would show him just how wrong he was about me. Let him think he was winning. Let him feel the high of his escape while I prepared for the next move. The game had just begun. I spent the evening at home, methodically going through the papers I had already prepared. My mind was focused, sharp as a blade, cutting through the emotions that threatened to surface. Ryan thought this was over. He thought he had the last laugh, leaving me with a shattered heart and an empty bank account. But he was wrong. I wasn't about to beg for anything. I had been preparing for this day for months, if not longer. My grandmother's house stood before me, still and quiet. It was my sanctuary, my place of power. As I sat at the kitchen table, organizing the legal documents, I found the wedding album tucked away in the back of a drawer. The faded pages of our early years were filled with laughter, smiles, the promise of forever. But that was before Ryan had lost himself. The man I had married, the one who once held my hand with so much promise, was long gone. Now, I was just a stepping stone for him to chase something younger, something better in his eyes. It stung, but I refused to let that sting shape my decisions. This wasn't about revenge, it was about protecting what was mine. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through his latest texts, each one more condescending than the last. I know this must be hard for you, but you'll be fine. You still have your little shop. The audacity. My little shop? The boutique I built from the ground up, the one that had brought me independence, that had given me everything he never understood or respected. His words were a reminder of how little he saw in me, but it only fueled my fire. There was a shift in the air that night. It wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I prepared for the next steps. Ryan would not walk away from this unscathed. He'd taken the first step to tear us apart, but I was going to make sure he would never take a single thing from me, not without a fight. The next morning, my lawyer called. "We're ready to file, and I've got all the documentation we need." "He's going to have a hard time explaining himself in court with all the evidence you've collected." I knew she was right. Everything had been calculated, planned, down to the smallest detail. As I hung up the phone, I glanced at the boutique's records, my business, my empire. It was thriving, despite Ryan's disdain for it. And soon, it would be clear to everyone, especially Ryan, just how much I had worked for and how little he truly contributed. That afternoon, the texts from him didn't stop. "You know, you should be thankful for me. I gave you your little business and helped you get started." I could almost hear the smugness in his words, but what he didn't know was that everything I had built on my own. There was no help from him, no sacrifice from him. He had always thought I was just playing at being a businesswoman, treating my boutique as a hobby. But now, it was my weapon. It was my lifeline, my power, and I wasn't about to let him take any of it. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. Instead, I turned my attention to the paperwork. Everything was falling into place. It was time for him to understand that this wasn't just about a marriage falling apart. It was about a woman reclaiming everything that was hers. And when the time came, I would be ready. The game had only just begun, and this time, the odds were in my favor. The day Ryan thought he had won, the day he left me with nothing but his cruel words and empty promises, was the day I began to understand just how much power I had. While he was out in New York, probably celebrating his new life with Emily, I was sitting in the driver's seat of my own destiny. I smiled at the thought. He thought he could simply walk away, leaving behind his mess for me to clean up. But he hadn't seen what I was capable of. The texts kept coming, each one dripping with condescension. "Maybe this will be a wake-up call for you, Elizabeth. I've been patient with you for so long, but you've always been too busy with your shop to notice me." I laughed out loud at that one. Your shop, he called it, as if it were some little hobby I dabbled in when I wasn't busy with the real work of being his wife. I wasn't surprised by his arrogance, though. It was always there, lurking beneath the surface. What shocked me was how blind he was to my capabilities. The moment he decided to pull that stunt and empty our joint account, he made a critical mistake. But he had no idea how prepared I was for this. I had watched, I had waited, and most importantly, I had planned. That evening, after another round of relentless texts, I dialed the bank and reported the fraud. It was almost too easy. I knew exactly what I was doing, and the bank representative was polite but professional, canceling the charges and freezing any further activity. I felt a wave of satisfaction as I hung up the phone. The tickets for Ryan and Emily's first-class flight? Gone. The hotel reservations at the Royal Palm? Cancelled. It was the smallest victory, but a victory nonetheless. I could already imagine their faces when they reached the airport, expecting to board their first-class flight, only to find that their tickets had been invalidated. Their little fantasy shattered before it could even take flight. I didn't need to do anything else. Ryan had already walked into my trap. He thought he was escaping, but he was only digging himself deeper into a hole. The next few days were filled with preparations. I gathered every piece of evidence I had. The hotel receipts, the text messages, the suspicious transactions on the credit card, everything. I wasn't going to just win this divorce, I was going to make sure Ryan felt the weight of his actions, that he knew exactly how much I had been watching, how much I had been planning. As I prepared for the legal proceedings, I thought about the time we'd spent together. How he used to hold me close, how we had shared dreams of a future together. But that was a different Ryan. The man I knew was gone, replaced by someone who had let his ego and desperation blind him. By the time I walked into the courtroom, I was a different woman. I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the wife who would beg him to come back. I was the woman who had been smart enough to protect her assets, to keep everything she had worked for separate from the wreckage of our marriage. I smiled to myself as I took my seat. Let him think he was in control. Let him think he had won. The judge would soon make it clear just how wrong he was. The courtroom was quiet when Ryan walked in, his designer suit too tight for his midlife crisis, and that look of false confidence painted across his face. I couldn't help but notice the stark difference between him and me. I was calm, poised, ready. He, on the other hand, looked like a man who knew the game was up but couldn't quite accept it. He sat down with his lawyer, trying to look as though everything was still under control, but I could see the way his eyes flicked nervously toward the door every time someone walked by. The arrogance that had oozed from him in his text messages was now replaced with an anxious energy. He had no idea what was coming. The judge called the session to order, and I could almost feel Ryan's discomfort radiating through the room. My lawyer stood up first, walking over to the judge's bench with the documents neatly organized. Each piece of evidence I had meticulously gathered over the past few months was ready to be presented. Hotel receipts, texts, the fraudulent charges from the credit card, the history of our separate accounts, all of it. Ryan hadn't expected any of it. He thought he could simply play the victim, blame me for everything, and get away with it. But I had already played my hand, and now it was his turn to answer for his actions. Your Honor, my lawyer began, we have ample evidence to show that Mr. Harrison deliberately withdrew funds from the joint account without Mrs. Harrison's consent, used shared credit cards to fund personal travel with his girlfriend, and engaged in deceptive behavior throughout their marriage. Ryan's lawyer jumped in with his usual defense, attempting to downplay the situation. Mr. Harrison has made some poor decisions, but he acted in what he believed to be a manner of fairness. No one is denying his mistakes here. Fairness? I raised an eyebrow, my confidence never wavering. What Ryan had done wasn't a mistake, it was a calculated betrayal, and the evidence proved it. My lawyer presented the first piece of evidence, the text messages where Ryan proudly admitted to taking the money, mocking me for my age, and claiming that the boutique was just my little shop. I could see Ryan's face change as the words hit him. His lawyer looked uncomfortable, and I felt a small sense of satisfaction as the truth began to sink in. His earlier bravado was starting to crumble, piece by piece. Mr. Harrison, the judge said, turning his attention to Ryan. Do you deny that you used Mrs. Harrison's credit card for a trip with your girlfriend, after you emptied the joint account? Ryan shifted in his seat, clearly flustered. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I could see the gears turning in his head, but it was too late. The truth was already laid bare. I was trying to make a clean break, Ryan muttered under his breath, his voice lacking conviction. I thought I could start over. I never meant for it to get this messy. The judge's gaze hardened. So, you admit to the charges? You admit to using funds from the joint account for personal expenses and making fraudulent charges against your wife? Ryan sat up straighter, his eyes darting toward me, but I didn't flinch. I met his gaze, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the truth in his eyes, the realization that he had underestimated me. The judge didn't wait for him to answer. Mr. Harrison, based on the evidence presented, the court finds that you have committed financial misconduct. The joint assets will be frozen, and you are required to return the funds you unlawfully withdrew within 24 hours. Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came out. His lawyer tried to argue, but the judge was done listening. It was clear. The court had ruled in my favor, and Ryan had no choice but to face the consequences of his actions. I sat back in my chair, the weight of the victory settling in. This wasn't just about the money, or the house, or the boutique, it was about reclaiming my life. Ryan thought he could destroy me, but I had already won. And now, the world would see the truth. As we left the courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in months. Ryan, on the other hand, looked like a man who had just lost everything. The game was over for him. And I was just getting started. The weeks following the court ruling passed in a blur, but the victory was sweet. It wasn't about the money, it wasn't even about the house, or the boutique. It was about the freedom, the power, and the undeniable truth that I had reclaimed everything that was mine. Ryan, however, couldn't seem to accept that his carefully crafted escape had been nothing but a dream. He tried, time and time again, to spin his tale, to convince everyone, his family, his friends, even himself, that I had somehow wronged him, that I was the one who had forced his hand. The texts from his sister, Amanda, came in almost daily, each one more desperate than the last. "He's still trying to make it work, Liz," she wrote one afternoon. "He says you've broken him, that he never wanted things to go this far. He's lost without you." I couldn't help but laugh at her message. Ryan was never going to take responsibility for his actions. He was a man who believed he could get away with anything, and I had just shown him that he was wrong. My success, my strength, was the ultimate revenge, because as he sank further into the consequences of his own choices, I was rising higher than ever before. Business was booming. The boutique, the very one Ryan had dismissed as just a hobby, was now a thriving empire. I opened a second location within a few months, then a third. I had gone from being the woman who was supposed to fall apart to becoming the face of an entrepreneurial success story. People came to me for advice, for guidance, wanting to know how I had built it all from nothing. And I gave it to them, freely, without hesitation, because I knew that my story wasn't one of pity. It was one of triumph. One day, while I was working late, packing up orders for my online store, I got an unexpected visit. The doorbell rang, and there she was, Emily. The young woman who had once been Ryan's shining new escape, standing in front of me, looking smaller than I had imagined. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly, clutching her purse like a shield. I believed everything he told me. About how you were cold, about how you never supported him. But now, after everything, I see what he really is. I stood there for a moment, taking in her words, the raw honesty in her voice. She wasn't the first person to learn the hard way, and she wouldn't be the last. I nodded, a soft smile playing on my lips. "You don't have to apologize," I said, my voice steady. "You didn't know. But I'm glad you figured it out." Emily shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting around the boutique as if she were seeing it for the first time. "He tried to make me believe that you were the problem. That you were the one holding him back, that he needed to escape from you to find happiness. But now, I realize it was all lies. It was never about me. It was always about him." I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for her, but I knew better than to let it cloud my judgment. She had made her choices, just as Ryan had made his. And now, like him, she had to deal with the fallout. "I understand," I said. "But just know this, his problems are his own. And it's not your job to fix them." As she left, there was a part of me that felt for her. She had been young, naive, swept up in a fantasy Ryan had created. But another part of me felt nothing but relief, because I knew the truth now. I had never been the one in the wrong. I had been the one who had built everything from the ground up, who had the strength to walk away and take control of my own fate. As the months passed, Ryan's life only seemed to get worse. He bounced from one failed venture to the next, trying to chase the same empty promises he had made to Emily, only to fall short every time. He was still living in his parents' house, barely scraping by. Meanwhile, my business continued to grow, my reputation as a savvy businesswoman spreading far and wide. And then, one day, I received a message from his mother. "Elizabeth," she wrote, her tone soft and full of regret, "I never thought I'd say this, but I just wanted to thank you. I've seen everything, how he's blamed everyone but himself. And now, I see the truth. You were right all along. You've taught me and our family a hard lesson. You showed us what it really means to support someone, and what it means to enable their bad behavior. I just wanted to let you know that, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you." I read her message several times, letting it sink in. She had finally seen it. And I had finally proven that sometimes the best revenge wasn't about striking back, it was about succeeding. I framed the message and hung it in my office, next to Ryan's last text before I blocked him. The one where he said, "Have fun with your little shop. At least it'll keep you busy in your old age." It wasn't just a reminder of what I had overcome, it was a reminder of how far I had come. A year later, at the grand opening of my fourth boutique location, I stood in front of a crowd of loyal customers and business partners, my heart swelling with pride. The empire I had built was no longer a dream, it was my reality. And in that moment, as I spoke to the crowd, I knew that nothing Ryan had ever done could touch me again. The past was gone, and my future was bright. As I stepped off the stage, my phone buzzed with a notification. A news outlet wanted to interview me about my success. They were calling me an inspiration, a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity. I couldn't help but smile. And just as I was about to reply, a text came through, this time from Amanda. "I just wanted you to know that Mark's finally out of his parents' house. He's back on the dating apps, still blaming everyone else for his problems." I chuckled softly. Good luck with that, I whispered to myself, turning back to the new life I had created. I had one.